Well, this is going to be fun because I'm basically talking to my home country here. So, Upkar, welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Nice to see you, Mark. Nice to see you again, and delighted to be part of this.
No, I really appreciate it, and I think our audience is going to really learn some stuff, and we'll have a good time at the same time. So, always the best place to start. If you can briefly introduce yourself, but I have to tell this to guys especially, not anything about the business yet. Just like, who are you? Where are you from originally? Where are you now? What about family? You could, if there's something you've never told anybody and you want to reveal it to the world now, you could do that too. That would be kind of cool, but you don't have to. But tell us about Upcar.
Yeah, so maybe just to give you a little bit of background on my journey. Born in India, moved from India to England when my parents moved there to in search of a better life, and then moved to Canada, your home country, many
Yeah.
many years ago as an 8-year-old, and ended up in the city of London, Ontario. And London's just west of Toronto for the people in the US that may not know it as well. Home to a relatively well-recognized university called Ivy or Western. And grew up there until I moved to Waterloo to go to school after high school. And my journey has taken me back to Toronto, and then from Toronto to the US and California, where I worked, back to Europe and London, where I worked for a while, and back to Toronto. And so I'm located now in Toronto, have a family with 2 kids who are a little bit older, settled on their own, and now have, dedicated my life in the last few years to doing something a little bit more impactful and meaningful in the world of impact investing.
Do you have any brothers, sisters?
2 sisters, one that lives close by in the city of Toronto, one that lives a bit further west near Leamington, home of tomato country and a famous Heinz plant for ketchup and so forth. So
No sugar added, right?
not
Um,
at all. Yeah.
well, we talked about siblings and kids. What were you like as a kid or a teenager? Were you a reader? Were you a writer? Were you the lemonade stand entrepreneur, or did you play sports, music? What did you do? What did you like doing? Can you hear me?
So, Mark, as a kid coming into London, it was actually a bit of a challenging environment because we came into a city that was relatively homogenous, had not seen people who looked different than the vast majority of people there. And, as an illustration, I think there was no kids in my public school class who were visible minorities, and 4 kids out of maybe 2,600 in my high school who were visible minorities. And, as you can imagine, with many of the stories I'm sure you've heard of immigrants that come to a new country. My parents were really, really engaged and really, really, preoccupied with settling down, raising a family, getting established in a country that was completely foreign to them. What I didn't tell you is how we ended up in London was my dad got his CA in England, and then the Canadian government moved him over and offered 3 places. I think I've told you the story about 3 places where he could work for Canada Revenue Agency: Winnipeg, Sudbury, and London. And since London was the only name he had heard of, he ended up saying London, and that's how we ended up there. We avoided your home city, Winnipeg, which I think was a blessing in disguise. But coming into London, we had no knowledge of what that would be like, no idea what the weather was like, how we fit in cultural practices. And so it was a difficult period of time with not a lot of supports from parental and not a lot of, family or friends in the area. We were the first family that had moved to Canada. And so I was relatively withdrawn. I had a sister who was incredibly accomplished and successful in school, but she was also very, very, I'll say, energetic and talkative. And so she took up a lot of the conversation. And again, reflective of an immigrant background, accomplishments and achievements were highly prized because we had this belief that education is the path to success and so forth. So I'd say I was an okay student, played soccer because of my influence from growing up in England, loved the game, fell in love with the game of hockey, although I didn't play because I had, started skating so late compared to the average Canadian who starts at the age of 3 or 4. And
Are you
so,
kidding? We come.
yeah, so it was,
I told somebody the other day our moms have a really hard time because we come out with skates on, basically.
yeah, wow. I don't want to picture that. Yeah, and so I think it was a period of time in my childhood that was just about adjusting, getting my feet wet, getting familiar, feeling that I was, making friends, learning, I'm going to say a new language, although technically it was still English, but just a different form of English,
Sure.
because we had the Queen's English as opposed to Canadian English,
Yeah.
and really trying to find my way a little bit. And so I didn't really, I'm going to say, really didn't blossom in my, formative years as I first moved to London, and I think it was sort of a bit with a delayed effect as I started to come into my own in university and beyond that.
How did it come to be Canada versus any other country that your parents came to?
It was just a case of in Canada at the time, there was a shortage of CAs. The Canadian government had looked in Canada, they couldn't find any. And as you probably know, the CA system, now it's CPA, but the chartered accountancy profession was really structured and organized by Britain.
Right.
And Canada followed the same practice of education, certification, and the status given to people who were trained in that. And my dad had worked for a firm that was a smaller firm of Deloitte's. And so, had the training and the background that carried over well to the Canadian professional accreditation
Yeah.
standards here in Canada.
No, that makes sense. You had talked about, going to college. I know you got your bachelor's in economics and accounting, and then a master's in accounting at actually one of my favorite schools, University of Waterloo, as you said. And what were you envisioning there for yourself at that time, and then took you to a few firms, some that I remember, Thorne Riddell, I was in that one for a while, E&W, and then KPMG. What were you thinking was going to happen?
Yeah, so the move to University of Waterloo was really triggered by my desire. I think I learned in high school that I wanted to do something in business. And so the something in business meant that I needed a good, solid educational background. And being or going into the accounting field allowed me that entree or that access into the business world. And so the working with the firms, Thorne Riddell was really as a co-op student through Waterloo. And as you know, Waterloo's got a phenomenal
Right.
co-op program, best in the country.
Yeah.
And so then going to Thorne Riddell and then EY, or actually it was Ernst and Winnie, and then became merged with Thorne Riddell to form KPM, went back to KPMG and so forth.
Never
So that
that, by
was
the way,
really,
that you never burn your bridges because you never know if you're going to leave a place and then you're going to merge back with the place you just left.
no, no, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And as you know, the Big Eight, when we went to school, the Big Eight became the Big Four. And so a
Yeah.
lot of those firms consolidated for sure. And so I think that was just really, for me, the formative part of learning the basics of finance, financial statement analysis, accounting, auditing, et cetera, just to get exposure to a wide range of clients, to be able to go into businesses and understand very quickly, as you're required to do, what makes a business tick? What are the drivers? What are the risks? How do they go about from
Yeah.
a customer marketing sales standpoint? And so it was really for me just very much about the learning. And I left the Big Four, KPMG at the time, as soon as I could because I knew that I did not want to become an audit partner and wanted to move into the corporate world, which is
Yeah.
where I ended up going into Nortel. So
Yeah, I can totally relate. I can totally relate to a few things. Being Jewish, education was a big deal in our family too. And they came
yeah,
from
yeah,
Kyiv in Poland. And then I didn't want to be a partner in a CPA firm or CA firm. And but that was a good foundation. So I totally understand
yeah.
all of that. And then you say Nortel, that was actually a client of mine at Deloitte as
Oh
well.
yeah.
But you landed at though I really noticed you landed at three of Canada's like incredibly recognized real estate companies. Olympia, New York, Reichman, and Trizac Hahn. I mean, players, big time players. Was that a specific industry that you had a focus to join? And let's start with that. Was a specific industry you looked at, or did it just happen per se?
It was really a series of serendipity and fortunate events. It was not an industry I targeted. Maybe to give you context, when I joined Olympia in York. And when I joined Olympia in York, it was actually in the corporate office in corporate finance, working for the CFO. And Olympia in York at that time, for those people who are my age, they might recall that Olympia in York was a global player. At one point, it was the seventh wealthiest family, the Reichman family, on the world stage. And it had holdings, if people recall, in forest products through Abitibi Price, oil and gas through Gulf Canada, Interprovincial Pipeline, Consumers Gas, Santa Fe Energy, Santa Fe Pacific Railroads, and Catalyst Realty, and some UK players. It was a global player in a number of these segments. And so that was just to work in the corporate finance office to get exposure. And the funny thing, Mark, is when I got the call while I was at Nordtal, they didn't tell me the name of the company. They just said, there's a fast growing company. It's a conglomerate. It has five executive VPs or a small group of people that are really driving the strategy. It's a global player. Are you interested? And I had pegged the company based on that brief description as Onyx. And so I did all my work, looked up Onyx, Onyx owned Purolator and Continental Can and LSG Sky Chefs. And so did all my work expecting to go into this interview with Onyx. And they said, hi, this is Andrew Jones from Olympia, New York, and this is the company. I knew nothing about the company really at that point in time,
Well,
but
hold on. Was that a recruiter that did that?
it was a recruiter. And
How do you
because of
send
the
a
right,
person into an interview without even knowing the company?
well, as you may recall, if you know about the Reichman family, they're very private,
Yeah, I
very
know.
private. And so they did not even disclose the name of the company at all until you got to the interview. And so I had to sort of fumble and sort of do a quick, dance about what I could bring to the table and so forth. Obviously, I did enough that they hired me, and that became the journey and entree really into what ended up becoming more real estate focused following the Olympia New York initial position.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, obviously we do a lot of searches in what we do here and a lot of them confidential and NDAs and everything, but we still tell the candidate before they go in who they're going into. And they have to be confidential too. That's tough. That's tougher.
Yeah.
Can you share any experiences that you had in investment, and you were also very involved international that stand out to you as like they were super interesting or super complicated or that they were so different?
Yeah, I'd maybe just maybe connect the story of Olympia, New York. Olympia, New York at the time was doing what I would call probably some of the most complicated leading financial transactions. So we'd have the global investment banks just march through our offices, the Citibank, Security Pacifics, Morgan Stanleys of the world coming through our offices with all in pursuit of a new complex financial arrangement to effectively save both interest costs, either managed currencies, because we were in multiple countries. But, I'll just give you a couple examples. So one financing we did for Olympia New York involved something as follows. It was a borrowing from the Japanese banks, of which at that time the Japanese banks were really the biggest banks on a global stage, borrowing in Japanese yen from Japanese banks, secured by US real estate assets converted to pounds to fund Canary Wharf. And so it was three continents to try to get this financing with both an interest rate swap and a currency swap to try to facilitate this financing in pounds done in Japan, in yen, secured by US real estate. That would be just one example. The other simple example, which is, I know it sounds really commonplace now, but in 1987, when I joined, we had done the first interest rate swap in Canada. There was no ISDA, Investment Swap Dealers Association. There was no documentation. I spent the better part of 9 months working with our lawyers and Bank of Montreal's lawyers on a $100 million interest rate swap, saying, just like, what is this? Like, what's the counterparty risk? Like, how do we deal with this? And what if this happens? And so that was just the start of a series of complicated financial arrangements that, working with Paul Reichman, who was probably one of the most brilliant financial minds globally, that he had essentially, thrust upon us is how do we get more financing in different ways to try to finance and fund the projects that we want to initiate. So those are just a couple examples of some really, really interesting state-of-the-art groundbreaking transactions that I had the good fortune of working with Ken Leung, our CFO, on to really try to enhance my understanding of, the power of finance.
Yeah, and some of the, like you said, some of the projects, some of the assets they had were absolutely incredible. And coming out of Canada, sometimes people didn't believe that that was actually in Canada, and type of deal as well. So, what a foundation for experience. We, um, well, actually, I forgot I was going to ask you something else here. You then had some, shorter term yet specific adventures, as I call it, creating a private equity fund at OnCap. Is that correct? To an IPO experience as CFO with Electrovaya, and then M&A at Reliance. And I only bring up these because they were like almost short stints, but I wanted to get a sense of why you did that and what you got out of those.
Sure. So the maybe taking you back to the Onyx experience. So 10 years after my failed interview that I thought was with Onyx, I had the opportunity to actually work with Onyx and got hired to start up OnCap Investment Partners while I was at Trizec and joined them to really kick off their small cap fund, which was their first fund. And it was a great experience learning about private equity. I had been on the side as a corporation, whether Olympia, New York, or Trizec. We would go out and we had created a number of really sophisticated financing instruments, but now I was in a position of going out and raising financing to go fund or invest in companies. So great experience. And as you know, based on your background, Onyx is considered really one of the blue chip private equity firms in the country, led by Jerry Schwartz. Very, very intelligent, capable individual, and really, really well regarded for their astute investment strategy. So we raised the fund, and I realized that, it was for me a little bit of I'm going to say a little bit of a culture clash in terms of what I was looking for. And also, it was a little bit more distant in terms of having the direct impact at a corporate level of what I could do, because now I was an investor, not an operator. So
Right.
I was guiding others, investing in other entrepreneurs and businesses, as opposed to being more direct. And so when the opportunity came to go back into the corporate world with this company that had developed some really interesting lithium ion technology for smartphones and laptops, I
Yeah.
sort of took that opportunity. They wanted to do, and at that time, this is not going back a few years, wanted to do a cross-border IPO at a valuation of $1.5 billion pre-revenue. And so it was like a great opportunity to actually do a very, very interesting IPO. Now, the markets didn't pan out, and so we ended up doing a Canadian only IPO at a much lower valuation, but still was back into more of a hands-on operational role. And what I realized through that is that I had just the good fortune of learning so much through the KPMG and the Nortel experience. Nortel, again, $250 billion market cap, public company, globally recognized, leading telecom player, to the Olympia, New York, and Trizec, working with Peter Monk. But I actually wanted to do something a little bit more autonomous and independent on my own. And so the foray from going from Onyx to the technology company to the IPO to Reliance Aerotech, where now I was a minority shareholder in an aerospace firm. And then that evolved into actually forming my own firm with another partner of mine to become a bit of a merchant bank in looking at how to both advise, invest in, and run companies, especially those that needed hardcore, serious capability from an operational or structuring or restructuring standpoint. So this was the evolution from get the experience, get your feet wet, get the grounding from really big cross section of clients, focus clients, raise money, and just to try to apply that to see if I did in fact have the skills that I had learned through that and could apply them in a positive way. So that was sort of the evolution more to an entrepreneurial, independent, autonomous role that sort of gave me a little bit of both, I'm going to say, challenges, opportunities, and a little bit of a test to see if, in fact, I had learned what I needed to learn to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's a great case study. We'll make you a case study of creating a foundation to then go out in the world type of thing. And it almost sounds like an inflection point. We found that our firm, Fifth Element, based on the premise that leaders in the organizations can always do better economically if they're doing good at the same time. And it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's inflection points where you were at Van City, you were a Meridian board member, you were a thought partner, and then, of course, CEO of Rally Assets. It sounds like you started thinking that economic and social impact can come together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Mark, you and I have had the conversation, but as I've gone and talked to more people in this space, I think for many people, there's actually a really pivotal moment or a really core grounding. And I saw that working for the Reichman family and Peter Monk and Jerry Schwartz, their commitment to philanthropy and actually using the value that they would create to actually do good was very, very pronounced, very, very apparent. And we see that in what they've left behind, whether that's through the Monk School or the Monk debates, for example, or
Right.
the Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz Center on University Avenue. So I had grown up with a very strong orientation that it was our responsibility, no matter how little we had, to do good for others. For us, and in our culture, we call it seva or service. It was community service. And my mom was the person who held on to that beacon, that really, really strong principle. And that really influenced my thinking. And so through my life from the age of 14, I've done volunteer work where I could. And when I start to earn money, I set up scholarships and made donations. And so that underlying core theme or desire or sense of responsibility was always there. It just became a question of how to animate that, how to transfer or translate that.
Right.
And as time went on, I had more flexibility, more choice, more means, more resources at my disposal to do that. So I could be more selective as opposed to more restricted when, as you know, earlier stage, you are still in the habit of being responsive to other people's expectations and commitments, and a little bit more limited in terms of both time and money from a resource standpoint as to what you can do. So that was really the underpinning and the foundation. So I wouldn't call it new. I'd call it a reversion back to what I already knew, but wanted to animate in a more tangible, explicit way when I had the opportunity to do so.
No, thank you for explaining it that way. That's it's such a great example, and it's clear that Rally Assets is, I think, as you even call it, business as a force for good. And you're a certified B Corp, which is not easy necessarily to get either. You really have to be committed to it. It's not just you get a paper that says you're certified, that's for sure. It shows your clear commitment to assisting clients to align their investments with values too. Can you share with us what that means in terms of client engagement with you and supporting them on their, and I think every investment should be an impact investment, but it really means more than that.
Yeah, and so yeah, so we've been a B Corp since 2012 and recognized best in the world in certain categories for workers and governance and so forth. So really, really strong commitment. And I know, and people will say this, that capitalism has done a lot of negative damage, whether that's to people or planet. But at the same time, I think it can be a force for good and
Right.
believe that. And it's a great tool at our disposal. So the way we've translated that commitment to using the existing capitalist system is really to think about what Rally does. And Rally has a single purpose, which is to basically ensure that investments made have a dual objective of delivering both return and impact. And the impact is both real, measurable, intentional. And that could be either social or environmental impact. So we are
Right.
not trying to be all things to all people. And so where we are focused is on anyone who has either a desire to learn, a desire to dabble, a desire to invest, a desire to commit, and a desire to move a significant portion of their investable assets into investments that can achieve that dual imperative of return plus impact. And so that can mean it can mean high net worth individuals, family offices, corporations, foundations, anywhere where that goal is dual in nature. And so we've built up the capability, being very early in the space, going back to 2010. Our firm started in 2010, not by me, but by three founders who started that firm as Purpose Capital. We migrated that from an advisory firm to an investment firm. The goal of that, translate intention to action and eliminate the barrier so that more capital can flow into being impactful, and that capital can be more effective in delivering better outcomes for people, and then changing the way that we think about the system. So we try to reduce the negative externalities, as we call them, or implications of how we invest in a way that we stop the damage being caused and move to creating solutions that can actually do good for people and planet. So our team, if you ask them to, for every single person on our team, they're there because they are so committed to that objective and want to see their work, their effort, their gifts, their talents, their expertise really be directed to doing something that's beneficial for people and planet. And so all of our, I'm going to say, our purpose is defined that way. The clients we serve is focused on that. We try to embed those considerations in terms of our statement of justice, our code of conduct, and so forth. And we try to ensure that there's coherence, alignment, and consistency around that, so we are able to achieve that goal that we have of actually delivering more impactful investments that benefit people.
If someone, and man, can I relate to that, of course, but again, someone, oh, can you share any special experiences or accomplishments or specific investments? If someone says, well, what do you mean by Or I love the idea that I can make an impact social, but also make money. And I understand that to be sustainable, that social impact, you need to have economics behind it too. Otherwise, it won't be sustainable. But are you involved in all types of sectors? For example, we get involved in water and hunger and poverty and this all different sectors of that. How do you look at that?
Yeah, so Mark, the way we look at that is we do what you would do as well in your business, which is to really get a deep understanding of what's the motivation, what's the desire, and what's the underlying need. And so many people that come to us, if it's an individual family office or someone like that, they often have a very personal experience in
Right.
some way that drives their desire of where they want to make a difference. It could be a family member that's been afflicted by a disease or a mental health issue or has experienced being unhoused in some way. And so often it's driven by the sense of having overcome that or seen that in some way. How can we actually make it better for others who go through that similar experience? So often we have to look at the underlying desire and motivation. I will just be clear. And then we look at sort of what are the overall objectives. And it could be in the context of, it could be all the way from, I just want to make a difference on this issue, or I need an ongoing level of return because this is a pool of
Right.
capital that needs to sustain my operation. A foundation often has a range of 6 to 8%, 5 to 7% as the core return requirement from sustaining their operations, hiring people, doing the granting, and so forth, right? So we strive to look at both the desired in terms of the issue area, SDG, thematic orientation that they want to focus on. It
Mm-hmm.
could be one or multiple. We look at some of the portfolio return, risk return, liquidity considerations, and then we try to construct a portfolio that's customized to their needs on both of those fronts in a way that achieves both their impact and their return orientation, and continue to evolve that and continue to demonstrate financially and impact from an impact standpoint how we're doing against what we call an investment policy statement that relates to how we're going to manage their funds. And so, we've seen many examples of people who have been able to see and to experience, and it's kind of funny where we get the most satisfaction and why people actually initially gravitate towards this is the stories of real people whose lives have been changed in a fundamental way, who now have access, who now have, something that's improved in their lives, whether that's access to something that deals with mental health or physical health in some way, opportunity, access to education, access to opportunity from an economic standpoint, to job prospects, to certification. It could be a number of areas where, and you know this from your business, a lot of these issues are interconnected. If
Yeah.
we deal with housing, we actually may be able to deal with some of the other social determinants of health issues that happen,
Agreed.
diet and so forth. So that's where we see the greatest magic, which is if someone can see that through the capital that they have, often which they actually don't need to sustain their own livelihood because they have a level of capital that they're able to invest. They see real impact being delivered to real people. I'm just going to give you one recent example where,
Mm-hmm.
a few weeks ago, I went to a session that was hosted by BKR Capital. And BKR Capital is essentially a Black-led fund that focuses on providing capital for early stage VC opportunities to people who are in the Black community. One of the most, I'm going to say now, most well-known ones. And what they did was, and why I'm going to highlight this, they had a day where they talked about their fund and the investments they made and so forth, which is, general fare for fund managers. But what they also did, which I thought was really, really great, was they actually brought high school students to this investor day. They brought founders they've invested in. The founders told the stories of what their experience was growing up in some very, very impoverished or communities as they grew up they had transcended these challenges, developed business opportunities based on their own identification of needs that existed. And these high school students were able to see these founders on stage and see themselves represented. And I made a comment to one of our team members to say, 20 years down the road or 15 years down the road, someone's going to look back to that moment and say, because I saw Mark on stage, I believe that I too could be someone who thought about entrepreneurship as a way to get out of or transcend my current situation, to help others, to take care of myself and my family in a way that I wouldn't have seen, right? And so what we're talking about and what we try to focus on, Mark, is let's look at the system and how do we think about all the way from someone whose life has been changed to providing access so they too can benefit from the systemic approach to the issue area we want to address, right? And so high school to a founder to a fund to us who have invested as a fund of funds manager in BKR Capital and provided some guidance mentorship to Lise and to Isaac who are there and exposing that to our clients who have now talked about that. I mean, it's a great story about seeing that benefit. I'll just use one other quick example where I listened to Jen Harper, who is the CEO of Cheekbone Beauty, who started this firm, which is an indigenous-led firm that focuses on sustainable package and products for women that is now gone from this vision that she had a few years ago to being in Sephora and having a banner unfurled at the Eaton Center and talking about a conversation with an 8-year-old Indigenous girl who looked at that and said, wow, like that's powerful, right? It's powerful seeing those role models, seeing yourself represented and believing that you too could achieve your dreams.
It's powerful on steroids. And, we've been using a word recently a lot, and the word is personal. Talking to people in the Middle East about health is personal, and with people being hurt on both sides, talking to, people that have had issues here, there, but making everything personal. So on both sides, people can see, wow, I can be that. But also on the other side is, if you look at things like it's personal, it's you, maybe you'll make a change, you'll do something to change it and not look at things as just a statistic on a financial statement or this or that or the other. And where it leads, but goes back full circle to what you said initially was capitalism, nothing's perfect, but capitalism can be used as a force for good. In fact, as a very force for good to make it sustainable, exactly what you're talking about. So it's exciting to look at it that way. And you know what? Making people feel good and proud makes the community stronger, makes the companies stronger, and that goes full circle too to more creativity, more doing more stuff, wanting to be involved, etc. So I really appreciate you sharing those. We say in LA that we need to leave the audience wanting more so we can do a sequel. I think we may have to do that, but I have one more question I want to ask
Sure.
you here. Um, um, a client of mine told me in 2021, he was describing 2020, the pandemic year, and he said, it was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought, what a great statement, because so many people feel that it was yesterday and years ago, all at the same time. And we're already now at the end of 2024 pretty well, which is amazing in itself. Can you share with me what you're most grateful for and also what you're most hopeful for?
Yeah. Um, so Mark, my own personal practice is that I do a bit of a gratitude practice every day. It can be very short, but I think I'm so fortunate in being able to live the life that I have. And part of what we do at Rally and why Rally is actually because when I made the change from the corporate sector, and it comes back to just really the last thing that you said, which is, when we have been able to overcome challenges to make something of ourselves, how do we ensure that we don't there's two paths. One is to say, hey, I made it, good for me, I'm going to benefit from it. Or how do we create the scaffolding for others who don't have that and can follow us? So when I moved into impact investing, it was founded on 6 core principles, but the last 2 were really wanting to make a difference in Canada for the next generation. So I'm going to tie my gratitude and my hopefulness in the following way, which is to say, you can look at the world and say, there are many, many aspects that are severely problematic, and the US election may, in fact, I'm going to say compound or amplify some what I would say the worst tendencies that we strive to deal with on a daily basis. But I am super hopeful when I see, as you just mentioned before this interview, when I see the passion, the conviction, the intelligence of my kids' generation, the next generation, who have literally grown up as being social activists
Mhm.
and committed to change. When I see what they bring to the table, I think I'm incredibly hopeful that as much as we have done a poor job in handing them a world that needs so much change, a planet that is in dire need and in dire straits,
Right.
that they will have the ingenuity, the commitment, the passion, and the optimism to see it through in a way that, changes the course of what we're experiencing. And so I'm incredibly grateful that I have a family. I have two kids that represent the values that I think are going to be essential for creating the world that we want, that bridge divides, that bring people together, and that apply their talents in a way that's more than about themselves. It's about creating community, creating connection, creating opportunity for people to thrive. And that gives me hope.
Well said, man. I'm grateful that you're a leader who cares and a new friend. I'm grateful for that, also, and I'm hopeful for not only people like you, but like your kids and others too. I agree. There's always going to be people that don't do the right thing, but I still think there's way more people that want to do the right thing, and we're actually proving it with some of the young people that we're bringing on to Leaders Who Care now that are doing things that at 12 years old, my best friend was a hockey stick. It wasn't doing in the environment or whatever. So,
Yeah.
it's a hopeful time. Thank you so much for being a leader who cares and for being on the series. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mark. It was wonderful to talk to you.